All right, welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about this Broncos-Chargers game, and we'll go back to what Tim Jenkins was talking about and some of the bad plays that he saw out there. The interception was a pretty obvious one. We covered that yesterday on the show, so I'm not going to go too deep into the interception again at the beginning of the game. But, so some of the other things keeps coming back to the footwork stuff. And what I find, I guess, sort of interesting to me is that while I agree with everything he's saying, especially about his the left, like he wanting the left foot back instead of the right and everything pre-snap, especially in shotgun. On the other side, I felt like I'm still seeing improvements where earlier in the year I thought he really looked lost at times with his footwork. And you and I, we've gone to a bunch of the combines and the Senior Bowls, and we've been watching quarterbacks for a really long time. That's you always look at quarterbacks' feet. Like, it's the very first thing. You don't watch the ball, you watch their feet. And if you watch their feet, you can tell a lot about what the quarterback's doing. He doesn't look as scattered, I guess, is one of the best ways I can describe it, because sometimes he had the pitter-patter going on earlier in the year. That seems to be settling a little bit. I don't know if that's a little bit more trust in his offensive line or a little bit more trust in his reads, more comfortability with the scheme. What do you read into that?
I think a combination of those things. I think there's more trust.
Not perfect.
Right, but I think there's more trust in his line. I think there's more familiarity with the full menu in terms of what it is that he's trying to do, and the game slows down for you, air quotes, when you start to do that. I think Drew was a little frenetic when he came back off that injury. One, he was a little hurt. Two, he still didn't have the offense down. And, and so when you don't have that down, you're trying to struggle and compensate for that. And then you lose focus on things you're supposed to be focused on. You talked about a quarterback's feet. You build a house from the ground up. You don't build the roof first and then worry about the rest of it. It's the same thing with a quarterback. You build it from the ground up. You start with the footwork and then you work your way up. And Drew has a natural athleticism to him that has allowed him to get away with some bad habits down there over the course of his career. He really needs to commit this offseason to refining that mechanically, and I think he'll be a much better quarterback for it. But right now, you've got a quarterback who is still trying to work the offense. It's a new scheme, new system. He's trying to work all that, and he's not concentrating on those kinds of things. I think once he does that, I think that he'll be a much better quarterback, and the fans will be much better off for it.
100%. And I think that's not even just what he's doing in the pocket, too. I think that's with his scrambling as well. It just seems more calm in general. But, yeah, definitely some things to work on. I wanted to kind of ask you, though, and this is something we've debated a little bit on the show, but I want to bring this out because it seems like it's a pretty hot topic on Twitter. I want to talk a little bit about the balance between watching the film and the stats, right, the analytics, because you have – they're not completely different schools of thought, but in some ways they kind of are, especially when they are kind of polar opposites of each other at times. Because you see, like, we're talking about some of the improvements on film. We're saying, hey, I see improvements on film, yet the analytics and the stats say, nah, this is still a bad quarterback and a bad offense. So how do you, as somebody that, I guess, absorbs all of this information, how do you find that balance?
Well, to me, it's not a balance. To me, the tape is the story. The stats can contextualize some of that sometimes, but reality is stats can be skewed. You can make anything sound like anything, as The Office so eloquently put it. I think that, and to put that in perspective, Drew Lock's quarterback rating for this past game was about a 50, right? Which is bad. But if you change just two plays, you take away that Hail Mary at the end of the game, which was a meaningless play, and you take the Deshaun Hamilton catch at the 1-inch line, and then Drew, quarterback, sneaked it in for the touchdown, which doesn't count for his quarterback rating on the next play. If you take that, just turn that into one passing touchdown, all of a sudden Drew Lock's quarterback rating goes from a 50 to a 70 right there. So the stats can be misleading. We saw, as a matter of fact, we had a guy on Twitter that did some kind of little meme thing, like, pointing to the box score, some little cute meme thing, and it was obvious that he hadn't watched the game at all, because he was doing some meme about Drew Lock, still not being good. But the reality is this might have been Drew Lock's best game as a quarterback, but you wouldn't know it if you were just a box score scout. So you have to watch and pay attention to what's going on and understand that there are little things that change the numbers overall. Like Deshaun Hamilton falling down at the 1-inch line instead of just turning around and holding the ball at the goal line on that catch. All of a sudden that changes, or a meaningless Hail Mary at the end. How many meaningless plays on last-minute drives has Drew Lock thrown interceptions on? He did it against Kansas City once. He did the Hail Mary there. I'm pretty sure there's a Falcons one in there somewhere. You go back and you look at some of these interceptions that he's thrown. They were just trying to get the offense going against New England. They should have been running the football. They were just trying to get him comfortable, and they threw two interceptions they didn't need to throw there. Some of these interceptions are not actually on Drew. Now, some of them are. You go back and look at the early stuff. Miami game, that first interception. Kansas City, first interception. And even this Chargers game first. Those are on Drew. So you have to contextualize those numbers with what actually happened. And for me, finding the balance isn't finding a balance. It's what does the tape say? And then how do these stats match? Take the stats and look at those stats in the context of what is shown on tape.
I'm glad you brought it up the way you did, because something that's kind of floating around Twitter right now is that the Broncos quarterbacks, by the way, this is important to note, quarterbacks, and think about the quarterbacks that they've started there, are last in the league in adjusted net yards per attempt.
Right.
Well, think about the guys that we're including in Kendall Hinton. We're including Brett Rippon in this one start, right?
Jeff Driscoll
in there.
Which Rippons wasn't that bad. He threw some interceptions he didn't need to.
But I'm just saying, like, the team, sure, but you're also including a wide receiver off the practice squad in your calculation. Yes, that is true. But also, the Broncos, Drew Lock is actually 30th, and when he's ahead of Daniel Jones, Nick Foles, Alex Smith, Sam Darnold, Carson Wentz. I mean, again, not necessarily the group. He's right next to Cam Newton and Tua Tagovailoa and Joe Burrow. And so my point of it is, for a guy that just made 16 starts in the league, and he made a 17th start against the Chargers, I think you can kind of at least have a conversation about him being really in his rookie year. And if he's in the midst of other rookies, I'm not going to be too down about that. So just kind of to bring it full circle, you talked about how sometimes the stats can tell us one thing, and sometimes stats will be used in a way to frame things another way. Well, yes, the Broncos as a quarterback room are last. However, there's a little bit more context there.
Right, and he's being dragged down by the Driscoll and Hinton things. But and also, if you go back and look, again, how much of those numbers are affected by meaningless plays at the end of the game? Like, for instance, him throwing the interception on the Hail Mary, or him, Deshaun, not getting in. I mean, like I said, like we just showed, that's a 20-point swing in one game with 2 plays. So, I think it's important to contextualize that stuff. Otherwise, you get lost in the data and you lose the forest for the trees.